In my studies of special relativity and general relativity, I have found that special relativity and general relativity lend very strong support for the theistic contention of eternal life after death. In theism, particularly in Christian theism, it is held that there are two very different eternal destinies possible for each of our souls, heaven or hell. And amazingly, in special and general relativity, we find that two very different eternities are possible, just as Christianity has held for millennia. The eternity associated with special relativity is found when a hypothetical observer accelerates to the speed of light. In this scenario, time, as we understand it, would come to a complete stop for that hypothetical observer traveling at the speed of light. To grasp the whole time coming to a complete stop at the speed of light concept a little more easily, imagine moving away from the face of a clock at the speed of light. Would not the hands on the clock stay stationary as you moved away from the face of the clock at the speed of light? Moving away from the face of a clock at the speed of light happens to be the very same thought experiment that gave Einstein his breakthrough insight into special relativity. Here is a video highlighting that thought experiment.
Today, E = mc squared is Einstein's most famous equation. But another theory he publishes this same year is more important and more controversial: the special theory of relativity. When Einstein was a teenager, he enjoyed imagining what it would be like to ride a beam of light. Now, he returns to this daydream, and it changes his life.
In the spring of 1905, Einstein was riding on a bus, and he looked back at the famous clock tower that dominates Bern, Switzerland. And then he imagined, what happens if that bus were racing near the speed of light?
In his imagination, Einstein looks back at the clock tower, and what he sees is astonishing. As he reaches the speed of light, the hands of the clock appear frozen in time.
Einstein would later write, "A storm broke in my mind. All of a sudden, everything kept gushing forward."
Einstein knows that back at the clock tower, time is passing normally. But on Einstein's light-speed bus, as he reaches the speed of light, the light from the clock can no longer catch up to him. The faster he races through space, the slower he moves through time. This insight sparks the birth of Einstein's special theory of relativity, which says that space and time are deeply connected. In fact, they are one and the same, a flexible fabric called space-time.
That time, as we understand it, comes to a complete stop at the speed of light, and yet light moves from point A to point B in our universe, and light is thus obviously not frozen within time, has some fairly profound consequences. In the following audio clip, Michael Strauss, who has a PhD in particle physics, reflects on one of those profound consequences.
What about something more commonplace, like our ordinary photons?
What about them?
There's so much, yeah. They are, from the point of view of a photon.
Yeah, okay, fine. I know what you get. Photons, because they go at the speed of light, time never passes for them. So, people, again, this comes to the transcendent God. People say, how could God be everywhere at one time? Well, photons everywhere at one time. So if a photon can do it, it's not hard for God to do. The problem is when you understand how limiting 3 dimensions of space and time are, 4 dimensions, and you understand relativity and quantum mechanics, the miracles of God become almost trivial.
The miracles so far.
The miracles so far. Well, they'll all be trivial for him. Yes, sir, in the back.
The only way it is possible for time not to pass for light, and yet for light to move from point A to point B in our universe, as if light is of a higher dimensional value of time than the temporal time we are currently living in. Otherwise, light would simply be frozen within time to our temporal frame of reference. One way for us to more easily understand this higher dimensional value of time that light exists in is to visualize what would happen if a hypothetical observer were to approach the speed of light. In the following video clip, which was made by two physics professors with a supercomputer, we find that the three-dimensional world folds and collapses into a tunnel shape as a hypothetical observer moves towards the higher dimension of the speed of light.
The video shows photorealistic representations of reduced C-scenes. This means that the speed of light has been slowed down from over 1 billion kilometers per hour to a speed of only 1 meter per second. The consequences of this fiction have been restricted to optical effects, and allows us to see special relativistic effects not possible in everyday life. The first scene is a trip down a highway without any relativistic effects. Note the position and orientation of the structures in the desert. For the next trip, we enable relativistic aberration. As we accelerate, note that the angular compression creates an initial impression of backwards motion. As we pass the sign, it seems to rotate around. This can be viewed as lateral rotation, or as angular aberration, keeping the sign in our field of view as we pass it. The back walls of the building are also visible, and extreme distortion is visible on all the objects. Note particularly the sky, steadily shrinking down to the vanishing point. With full relativistic effects now including the headlight effect, the image quickly turns monotone, with objects near the edge of the screen darkened, and the center brightly illuminated.
Besides the tunnel curvature to a higher eternal dimension in special relativity as we accelerate towards the speed of light, we also have tunnel curvature to a very different higher eternal dimension in general relativity. The following video is very good for explaining that tunnel curvature in general relativity.
Ultimately, the thing that gives him that clue turns out to be his old faithful way of reasoning, the thought experiment.
So it's what you and I would call daydreaming, but he gets to call them thought experiments because he's Einstein.
He's in his office at the patent office, looking out at the window, and he imagined a man working on a roof. And he begins to wonder what would happen if one of those men were to fall off the roof.
And then he had the happiest thought of his life, the inspiration of the ages.
He had a vision. The man will not actually be feeling his own weight.
He would be weightless. And then he imagined, if you're in an elevator and somebody cuts the cord, what happens to you? You fall. But the elevator falls at the same rate you do, so you are weightless inside the elevator. So then Einstein got it.
It's as though gravity's been switched off. What's really going on?
There is no such thing as gravitational pull. The Earth has curved the space around me, and space is pushing me into this chair. Space itself can be curved.
That's crazy sounding.
Space is adjustable.
It's actually malleable. Space and time are malleable.
It's this flexible thing that can be
We tend to think of space as rigid and stable, but Einstein proposed that space and time are woven together in a flexible fabric. Massive objects like the sun actually bend and warp the fabric of space-time, creating troughs that smaller objects can fall into.
What actually happens is matter warps space-time. So the very space, the three-dimensional space that we walk through, warps slightly. Every time when I walk through space, space around me warps in on me ever so slightly, but because we're not very massive, it's so minuscule that we don't sense it.
If an object is massive enough, like the Earth, it will warp space-time so we can sense it and fall towards it. That's gravity. But what happens if an object is much, much more massive than the Earth or the Sun? In theory, it could warp the fabric so much it would create an actual hole in space-time. Once something fell in, it couldn't escape, not even light itself.
So imagine a place where the gravity is so strong, turning on a flashlight. The light would go up and it would never leave. It would curve and come back down just the way a tossed ball on Earth. It's not traveling fast enough, it goes up, curves, and comes back down.
Space itself is falling inside the black hole. It's rather like a river falling over a waterfall. It's like that, except it's space itself that's falling over the cliff. There's a place where the space starts moving faster than light. So the light, which is trying to get out, it's rather like a kayaker trying to make their way upstream on a river that's going too fast. They get dragged down to the center of the black hole.
Gravity becomes a riptide. The closer you get, the stronger the current. Eventually, you reach the event horizon, the point of no return. Deep inside, whatever goes in is lost in a point of infinite density.
The matter goes inside the surface of the black hole, shrinks down to the very center, where it gets destroyed in a region of infinite warped space and time, and it's gone.
And so, it seems, are the laws of physics. At the center of a black hole, all equations break down. Even for physicists, what happens deep inside a black hole is a mystery.
Kip Thorne describes what will happen to a hypothetical astronaut falling down a gravitational well of a black hole. Einstein's equation predicts that as the astronaut reaches the singularity, the tidal forces grow infinitely strong and their chaotic oscillations become infinitely rapid. The astronaut dies and the atoms which his body is made of become infinitely and chaotically distorted and mixed. And then, at the moment when everything becomes infinite, space-time ceases to exist. In fact, entropy, which is the primary reason why our material bodies grow old and die in this universe, is found to be greatest at black holes. I will link this video, which goes over the very different entropies associated with general and special relativity respectively, in the comment section of this video, so you can go over that particular line of evidence at your leisure. It is also important to note that although hypothetically traveling at the speed of light in this universe would be instantaneous travel for the person going at the speed of light, because time does not pass for them, this timeless travel is still not instantaneous to our temporal frame of reference of time, and therefore it is not completely transcendent to our temporal framework. In other words, speed of light travel to our temporal frame of reference is still not completely transcendent of our framework, since light appears to take time to travel from point A to point B in our universe. Yet, in quantum mechanics, true instantaneous travel is not only achieved for the speed of light framework, but instantaneous travel is also achieved to our temporal framework. That is to say, the instantaneous travel of quantum information is instantaneous to both the temporal and the speed of light framework, not just the speed of light framework. Quantum information travel is not limited by time nor space in any way, shape, or form in any frame of reference, as light is seemingly limited to us in our current temporal framework. This discrepancy of what philosophers term the now is one of the main reasons that Einstein never received a Nobel Prize for relativity. I will link this video in the comments section of this video so you can go over that particular line of evidence at your leisure. To give us a little better understanding as to what it would be like to exist in a higher dimension, this following video, which is referenced on Anton Zeilinger's Quantum Outreach page, is very good.
Welcome to Flatland, a world of only two dimensions. Only forwards and backwards, left and right. In this world, there is no up and no down.
I said to Ray, "Where's Dottie?" He said, "Well, she's out in line." I said,
Where's that from? What the bleep is that thing? Huh?
In this world, the two-dimensional beings that live here have no concept of three-dimensional objects. These two-dimensional flatlanders have no understanding of cubes, spheres, tetrahedrons, or yours truly. From their 2D perspective, my 3D finger looks something like this.
What the flat earth is that?
Hello, little circle. Fear of the unknown. Or should I say, not yet known. It's a puzzle. If we see only what we know, how does anyone ever see anything new? The unknown. How do we ever get out of our box?
But we don't have to rely solely on our scientific reasoning and imagination to try to figure out what it would be like to live in a higher dimension. Amazingly, near-death experiences give us eyewitness testimony as to what it would be like to live in a higher dimension. In the following video clip, Mickey Robinson gives his near-death testimony of a timeless eternity and also of a tunnel.
And I'll never forget that day, because I had never heard any story like this that I'm about to tell you, never read an article, never saw anything on a film. But as I lay there in that much pain and in that much trauma, and for the first time feeling like I was going to die, I had an experience that I'd never heard anything such like this. As I lay there like that, suddenly the room around me began to dissolve. and my spirit man, the real person that lives inside. You see, I believe you are a spirit, you have a soul, and you live in a body. Well, that spirit man sat up inside the bed, out of my body, and it was like perpendicular to my body, and then suddenly I was ejected from my body. And I began to travel, and I was not in the room floating around looking at things. I was in a spiritual dimension. And this spiritual dimension, this spiritual world, that's the real world. And this spiritual man that I was seeing and perceiving, that was the real me. And I instantly knew it. The colors are brighter. The thoughts are more intense. The feelings are more, have greater depth. They're more real. And you don't, in the spirit world, instantly I knew this is the real world. And in the spirit world, you don't have logic and reasoning, based on the sum total of the great knowledge I've acquired and all these things. I think I've entered a spirit, it's like you know that you know that you know all the time. It's like having a word of revelatory knowledge all the time. And also, instantly, there was no sense of time. See, everything on earth is related to time. You get up this morning, you're going to go to bed at night. Something is new, it'll get old. Something is born, it's going to die. Everything on the physical plane is relative to time. But everything in the spiritual plane is relative to eternity. Instantly, I was in total consciousness and awareness of eternity. And you and I, as we live on this earth, cannot even comprehend it. Because everything that we have here is still within this veil of the temporal life. But in the spirit life, that's more real than anything else. And it's awesome. Eternity as a concept is awesome. There was no such thing as time. I knew that whatever happens is going to go on forever and ever, wherever I was being shown. And I was traveling somewhere. I could feel myself traveling. And as I began to perceive and understand what I was doing, it became more intense. And I could see this at a distance, this white light that was growing. And as I began to travel towards that light, as if I was being drawn and carried, there was nothing I could do.
And then I noticed ahead of me a bright light. It wasn't above me. When I came out into the light, it turned out it was way above. But as I looked at it, it just looked ahead of me. So I started to move toward the light. And the way I moved, the physics was completely different than it is here on Earth. It was completely something I'd never felt before and have never felt since. It was a whole different sensation of motion. I obviously wasn't walking or skipping or crawling or any of those things. I was not floating. I was flowing. I was flowing toward the light. I was accelerating, and yet I knew I was accelerating, but then again, I didn't really feel the acceleration. I just knew that I was accelerating toward the light. It was there again, the physics was different. The physics of motion, time, space, travel, it was completely different in that tunnel than it is here on Earth. I came out into the light, and when I came out into the light, I realized that I was in heaven. To me, it was heaven. It was just...
And then this vehicle formed itself around me. And vehicle is the only thing, or tube or something, I don't know quite, but it was a mode of transportation, that's for sure. And it formed around me. And then there was no one in it with me. I was alone. But I knew there were other people ahead of me and behind me. And what they were doing, I don't know, but there were people ahead of me and people behind me, but I was alone in my particular conveyance. And I could see out of it. And it went at a tremendously, horrifically rapid rate of speed. But it wasn't unpleasant. It was beautiful, in fact.
Now, this is interesting because normally we hear about the tunnel experience, but your tunnel seems to enable you to see out from it at the same time.
Yes, I could. I could see through apertures. Apertures are the only word I could think of in this vehicle or tube that I was traveling in. I could see out of it.
Wow.
And I went past hell, and there is definitely a hell.
I don't like this part of the story. What do you mean? You went past hell. Where is hell?
Well, I went past it. I traveled past it, and I heard and smelled it. And there was some friends of mine, like, it was about 8 or 9 years ago. They showed me this sample of rock from Sodom and Gomorrah, and I touched it, and I could not get that smell off my hands for like 3 days. And I kept washing and washing and washing, and I could relate to that Lady Macbeth feeling. And that smell, that sulfuric odor, was the same that emanated from that place. And I remember thinking, I want no part of this area. And as soon as I thought that, my conveyance went even faster. And
that's interesting. That's real interesting, because that sort of tells you that you wind up where you resonate. But then again, who in their right mind would say, "Oh, bring me to the stench"?
Yeah, it's really, I don't know, it's really weird. I just know that I wanted no part of it, and as soon as I thought that, then my vehicle went even quicker away from it.
This is good for the rest of us to know. Remember that. We want no part of this. I like that. All right.
I was very adamant about that in my thought process.
Now, this conveyance, if you will, did this seem like it was just a straight linear path?
I was reclining in this thing. I wasn't sitting straight up, but I wasn't lying down in it either.
Mm-hmm.
I was sitting back,
Mm-hmm.
and it was just so fast. I can't even begin to tell you where it went or whatever.
Okay.
It was just fast.
But it didn't seem to make turns and go over curves or anything?
It was so quick, I don't know what it did.
Okay.
It was I mean,
wow.
it was just, and then as soon as I got to where I was supposed to get, I heard this incredibly beautiful music.
Where do you wind up?
Well, I ended up in this place that was similar to a park shelter in a lot of ways. It was beautiful. It had huge flowers, and I was ejected very pleasantly enough, from this vehicle. And then Jesus was there. I was greeted by 2 deceased classmates and 2 people who had taken care of me when I was a child. And then Jesus was there as well, and my grandmother was there. She had died 2 years before. Everybody that was there to greet me was dead.
Push them away by talking about God. And so I'm trying to remember prayers, and I'm getting all confused and mixed up, and it was just all crazy, and I'm lying there, and eventually I realized that they're gone, and I'm alone. Now, I was alone there for an eternity, and what I mean by that was absolutely no sense of time. But I thought about my life, thought about what I'd done and what I hadn't done. I thought about the situation I was in, and the conclusion that I came to is that I had lived my adult life. I had lived a selfish life. My only God in my adult life was myself.
I'm going to take you to that date, November 23rd, 1998, and you go to bed, you get up at what time, 3 in the morning?
I got up at 3 o'clock just to get a glass of water.
How'd you know it was 3?
I looked at the clock.
Okay, you get the glass of water, what happened to you?
Suddenly, Sid, I found myself, I was being pulled out of my body. This was an out-of-body experience, and I've never had one before. But I was pulled out of my body, and I found myself falling through the air and tumbling down this long tunnel. And I entered into this open cavern area, and I hit this stone floor, and I found myself in a prison cell with rough-hewn stone walls and bars. I was actually in a prison, but it looked like a dungeon, filthy, stinking, smoke-filled prison.
Did you realize where you were?
I was fully awake and cognizant. I was not dreaming.
No, I understand, but did you know you were in hell?
Yes. The heat was far beyond the ability to sustain life, so I knew immediately.
Pulled out of the parking lot of that hospital, a young paramedic looked down into my face, and I could barely see him. I was so weak. But he said, "Sir, you need Jesus Christ." And I didn't know Jesus. I didn't know what he was talking about. So my reaction to that was to begin cursing. And again, he stated to me, "You need Jesus." And as he was talking to me, it appeared like the ambulance literally exploded in flames. I thought it had actually blown up. It filled with smoke, and immediately I was moving through that smoke as if through a tunnel. And after some period of time coming out of the smoke and out of the darkness, I began to hear the voices of a multitude of people screaming and groaning and crying. But as I looked down, the sensation was looking down upon a volcanic opening and seeing fire and smoke and people inside of this burning place screaming and crying. They were burning, but they weren't burning up. They weren't being consumed. And then the sensation of moving downward.
As I had the overdose, they're loading me up into the ambulance. Lillian is getting the ambulance with me. We're on our way to the hospital, and that's when they lost me. And I went from being high to all of a sudden sober, and it felt like somebody grabbed me and dropped me in this outer darkness as I started racing down this pit that was blacker than black, had no end to it. I realized that I was actually headed to hell. As I was headed down to hell, the first thing I did was I thought to myself, there must be a mistake. I've never killed anybody, robbed a bank. I mean, I'm a good person. I'm not that bad. And as I'm going down, it seemed like the more that I justified myself like there was a mistake, it went faster and faster. It was at that point that I realized there was no turning this thing around, so I cried out to the Lord and I said, "God, I need you. Please, Lord, just help me." And at that moment, the Spirit of the Lord comes down. I just felt like His presence. No, I didn't see anything, didn't see a face or a light or anything, but I felt the presence of God. And I knew it was God because it felt like everything just stopped right there. And as God was right next to me, He asked me a question I'll never forget as long as I live. He says, "Paul, what have you..."
So there you have it. The best of our science and general relativity and special relativity gives us strong evidence for two very different eternities, and we have that corroborated by eyewitness testimony from near-death experiences. It would be hard to find more convincing evidence that there actually is eternal life after death than that. And that's the end of the video. I thank you for watching and hope you enjoyed it.